Hi there, students. Scarcely, barely, and hardly. These are all adverbs that mean only just enough. So, for example, I had barely enough money. I had scarcely enough money. So I had enough money, but I only had 1 or 2 cents over. If I'd had any less, I wouldn't have had enough. I have scarcely any time. I have barely any time. So I have enough time, but I haven't got any extra to do anything else. By being thrifty and economical, I just have enough. Notice, barely enough, scarcely enough. We use these words with enough very often. Barely enough money, barely enough heat, barely enough time, yeah? And, okay, barely any as well. I have barely any money. I have scarcely any money. So notice in this case, scarcely any, hardly any, means almost none at all, but a little bit, yeah? So notice, barely any, the any is saying 0, but barely 0, so a little bit more than 0, okay? So he barely understands me. Only just. He just has enough understanding, but he doesn't understand me well. He hardly understands me. He scarcely understands me. Notice, scarce means that something is not common. There is a lack of it. Bare, without any clothes. Yeah, so if I take all my clothes off, I'm bare, so naked. And then hardly, this is nothing to do with hard, which is also an adjective. The wood is hard, my head is hard, but this is not related to hardly. Okay, so hardly, barely, scarcely, almost none, almost nothing extra. Notice, all of these 3 words have a negative meaning. So you don't say scarcely some, you need to say scarcely any. We use any because the scarcely, barely or hardly, has a negative implied in the word itself. Notice as well, all of these 3 are negative adverbs. So if you start a sentence with a negative adverb, then you need an inversion. I barely had any money, but barely did I have any money. Did I have? That's your inversion because barely is at the beginning. Scarcely do I have any friends. Hardly had I arrived than the telephone rang. Scarcely had I arrived than the telephone rang. Barely had I arrived, then the telephone rang. So these 3 as negative adverbs, if they begin your sentence, they require an inversion. If you're writing, these inversions look very good and they show off your knowledge. So there's something that I would strongly recommend for CAE or for proficiency in your writing. So barely, only just more than the necessary, only just more than 0. Scarcely and hardly, the same meaning. So remember, these words have an implied negative, therefore I have scarcely any understanding. He has barely any understanding. Barely any, hardly any. You can also use this with enough. I have scarcely enough money. I have barely enough time, only just. I have hardly enough understanding of what he's saying. And then as negative adverbs, if they go at the beginning, then you need an inversion. Scarcely do I understand what he's saying. Hardly does he understand the words that I'm saying. Barely does he understand, barely does he express himself in English. So only just. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed the video, give it a rating, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now. Scarcely, barely, hardly.